Today's Monday, August 4th, 2014. It's 6:05 p.m. We'll call to order the Brattleboro Planning Commission. The first order of business is to hold our organizational meeting. Is it just a coincidence that we're having an organizational meeting?
No, we have one every July, but
right.
because we had the public hearing for the zoning and we had a lot of work to do with Brandy, we pushed it off till August.
Okay. So, as some of you may know, and as some of you may not know, I was recently elected chair of the Developmental Review Board. And for a number of reasons, that causes me to want to hand the baton to somebody else here. And so I'm going to resign my post as chair. I'm not going to resign the committee until I can find a suitable replacement, because we've been a little low on manpower, and I don't want a shortage to affect the rewrite. But eventually, I will be riding off into the sunset in the general direction of the Developmental Review coast. So, we need to first elect a chair, and to that end, I would nominate Liz McLaughlin, because she's a planner, and she knows more than me, and she really cares about Brattleboro, comes to all the meetings. I mean, what more could you ask for?
And she's already the vice chair.
And she's already the vice chair, and she's filled in as chair. And she has no major political scandals that I'm aware of.
I haven't slit anybody's throat down by the street line.
Right, no skeletons in the closet.
I second that.
So, are there any other nominations? Okay, so I'll hear a motion to close nominations.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Congratulations, Liz.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's no salary.
It's just our company.
She wanted
The
it.
phrase dubious honor was
accepted the
running through my head, yes.
Right.
An occasional hangout.
Pat on the back.
I appreciate
Oh, good.
James's service. It was really
Yeah.
very well done, and appreciate it.
So I'm gonna hand the agenda over to you, and you'll conduct the rest of the meeting. Oh, okay.
Hold on to it.
Sorry.
We do need a vice chair and a clerk, which I left off the agenda by mistake, but that's just a figurehead position.
Yeah.
Okay. So, would anyone like to nominate people for the vice chair position? I would wonder whether James would like to be vice chair.
I'm happy to do it, but it'll be somewhat temporary until I can find my own replacement.
What?
You missed me resigning.
What?
Resigning
As chair. Oh,
No, I'm still here.
okay.
I'm staying on the board. I recently became the chair of the DRB,
Oh.
and not wanting to do both, Liz is
Be
going to
both
take.
chairs.
Fair enough.
Liz is going to take over as chair here
Oh, okay.
and direct this operation.
Got it.
So,
That was the vote we just took as before you walked in.
Got it.
yes, I would be happy to serve as vice chair, but if anybody else wants to,
Are there any other
I'd yield.
nominations? Hearing none, would someone like to second the nomination
Second.
of James? Very good. Any discussion?
What a great guy, huh?
What a great guy.
Very noble.
Yeah,
Very noble.
yeah.
Certainly was
Small
an
ego.
able chair, and we all appreciate it. But this is what he wants. Shall we take a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries.
6-0.
And now to a clerk. Carolina, are you the current clerk?
I am.
I nominate, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I nominate Carolina to
I'll do it again.
continue as clerk.
For all the duties that it requires. gonna crack the whip and make you all come on
Anyone like to
time.
second
Go
that
for beers
nomination?
afterwards.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor of Carolina being named clerk of the Brattleboro Planning Commission?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, unanimous election of Carolina as clerk. So now we need to review and approve the bylaws. And I think there's only one element that we need to discuss on
Yep.
these bylaws.
We, yes, yeah. If you don't mind me jumping in.
Please do.
So the one thing that we need to, that we definitely need to do in the bylaws is we need to move the meeting date to the first Monday of the month. The bylaws say it's the second Tuesday, so.
That's on page 3.
Yeah, so that's the only change that I proposed in that.
Correct.
Of course, bylaws can be changed in other ways, and, if you just want to make that change now and perhaps figure out, other changes, we can always bring it up at any time. It needs to be warned, but.
Does anyone have any other comments that they'd like to make or motions to change the bylaws?
I wonder if it would make more sense simply to say that the chair sets the meeting. Can we not do that?
We like to have a set meeting date because then we post it and it's good for the year. People know that when the meeting is and we put the dates out.
Okay.
We still need to send out agendas, but
And it's been that way for a million years, so.
Except, I think next month, Labor Day falls on
Yes.
Monday.
I was-
So, right away.
I was going to say we're going to go to
there's a
September
snafu.
3rd, but
Yeah.
Yeah, like we used to do on Tuesdays, we'd move it to Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Right.
Which would violate the bylaws.
Pardon me?
Which would violate the bylaws.
Yes, it would.
All right.
Do we have any
Is there-
more discussion?
I just have a question, and I'm looking for, is there something on term limits in here? Is there a place?
no, there's no term limits on the planning commission.
Oh, there's not. Somewhere I thought there was 8 years, like, isn't DRB 8 years?
DRB
9.
is 9.
And we don't have the same?
I think it's because the DRB is quasi-judicial,
Right.
whereas we're
Just,
don't really
We don't
have
count.
much authority.
Yeah.
okay.
Just statutory authority.
Statutory, yeah.
Yeah.
We got a little.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, because I'm close to that amount of time, so I just
Yeah.
wondered, and I...
Yeah, don't believe it's in the bylaws.
Okay, yeah, I didn't see it there, so...
You're not getting out of it that easily.
So
I know, I have another...
Planning Roach Motel.
This is on 14. I have 2 more years, because I'm finishing out...
I don't think so. I'll have to check yours.
No, what's his name, who got arrested?
Gary.
Gary.
Gary, yeah, I filling out his seat.
Okay.
I move to
And he's 16.
accept the changes to the bylaws.
I second.
Okay. All in favor of accepting the change to the bylaws as specified?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimous. Okay, now we move to approving 2 sets of minutes.
I move that we accept the minutes of Monday, June 30th, 2014.
And also-
Oh, we're doing separately, aren't we?
We certainly can.
Yeah.
Okay, this first one on June 30th was primarily the hazard mitigation plan, just to refresh everybody's memory, because it was a long time ago. Has someone seconded your motion?
Second.
James did. Okay. Any discussion? Let's bring it to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Oh, God, did this, wow.
Okay, that motion carried.
I move to accept the minutes of the July 7th meeting of the Brattleboro Planning Commission.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, shall we vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously also.
And just a question, R. Johnson, is that
That's Rita. She is our new clerk.
Oh, okay.
She replaces
The new-
Julia.
The new Julia.
Yep.
Right.
All right, are there any announcements?
No announcements.
Anyone else have any announcements?
Just that, I'm a member of VNRC, Vermont Natural Resources Council, and their latest issue of their whatever is all about land planning and fragmentation and how we plan around that. So it's fair. I only just started looking at it, so I don't know if the planning office gets this also, so that people
I do
can.
not get that. I do get emails from VNRC, and I know that they've been doing a lot of study of subdivision and forest,
Yeah.
and so they have a couple of publications that are out.
Yeah. Anyways.
So you can report to that the next meeting.
Yeah, but if anybody sees it around, it would be good reading.
All right, public comment. There are no members of the public here. So let's go right to Brandy, and we'll get right to our zoning bylaw work.
Okay.
Thank you, Brandy.
Well, we left off at chapter 430 at the last meeting, the development review procedures,
Right.
and that was on page 4-10. So I think that's in the back of your packet. So we're gonna start from the back.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's okay.
Is it in the back?
I think it is. I think
Yes.
Yeah.
but it makes sense page-wise. But
Yeah, that's probably why I did it. I wasn't
I think it
thinking.
was your part too.
Yeah, it was when I scanned it. I think
Mine
So-
jumps from 2 to 5.
Oh, the DRB, yeah, you actually
And then
added that in.
3. And not a 4. There we go. Okay. Oh, wait. I'm on part 5.
it's not in
Page
numeric
4-10 on the original.
Oh, there we go.
Yep.
Part 4. There we go.
Okay. So the first section, this is basically the procedures that the Development Review Board will be following and carrying out, the review processes that the Development Review Board carries out in this chapter. And the first of those responsibilities is to handle any appeals from actions or decisions that the administrative officer takes. When those are appealed, they go to the DRB. This is a largely statutorily defined process, which is laid out here. So I take any questions or comments on it, but it's something that's fairly structured by statute. I think we had one comment that we should make this appeals to or from or something, not from.
Yeah.
Of, yes.
Yeah.
This is section 431.
431.
Yeah.
So I actually sent a bunch of questions on this section already, so everyone knows.
Is this basically the same as what's already there then?
Yeah.
In the
Yeah.
In the existing zoning,
Yeah.
it might.
The process would essentially
Probably.
be the same. Yep.
It might look different, but it's the same process.
okay.
So Kathy, would you like to tell us or characterize your comments?
Sure, I suggested it say appeals of the administrative officer because I thought it was a little
Yeah.
confusing. And I made a suggestion which maybe we can talk about, although now that I've read part 2, I'm thinking it's probably not that good of an idea. The waivers and variances, so much of the process is the same that I was thinking it would make more sense to group them together and then point out the differences in when you would get a waiver and when you would get a variance and what the process difference would be. But considering that when you get into part 2, I don't remember, they were referring back to the sections. It occurred to me that it's probably better, it may be better to keep them separate so that it's sort of, when you're referring back to it, you get the information you need. I don't know, whatever.
And those are the next two sections, 432 and 433. So in many ways, those are also essentially an appeal. what you want to do can't be done under the zoning, and so you
So
essentially
these-
would be denied, but technically you're not really usually denied first. You just go get your waiver or your variance so that you can proceed forward to get the zoning permit.
Does anyone else have any comments about that?
About 431 maybe? Okay. So when we come to 432, the waivers, and I think I will discuss the waivers and variances together to address two issues. The main reason to separate them is that the variance is structured by statute. So these are the requirements in statute to grant a variance. And it's a very sort of specific amount of authority that's granted to the Development Review Board to grant a variance under these very specific conditions. Whereas the waiver is a more open and flexible tool. The statute just gives the municipality the authority to have waivers and to sort of define them for how you want to use them.
Is there a place for definitions of each of those? I could read through it and it was like, oh, okay, when do you do one and when do you do the other? And if you're, that for
That
me.
could maybe be clarified.
I think, yeah, point of like one of those information things
points,
could be
yeah.
useful.
And actually, the waiver and variance review criteria, I feel like that maybe starting with that table or that figure helps you understand which one you would need.
Yeah.
Because a waiver, you're only going to get a waiver in 3 specific situations, and everything else you're going to be asking for one of the 3 types of variances. So.
Yeah, it was still just a little confusing to me.
So in actuality, the waiver section, you have a lot of choices and flexibility. We can draft that to provide waivers however you guys want to. They're typically seen as being, to meet the variance criteria. If you read through those criteria, they're very strict. And, in many communities, this is, until they made recent changes in statute, it was the only option available. And, 80% of the variances are better that were granted. Actually, you're torturing the criteria to try to justify granting a variance for something that's reasonable, but which really doesn't actually meet the criteria. And so the idea behind the waiver is to create a process for smaller, typically more
Like little setback
things, things that you actually, this.
It looks, from your chart, I could tell what they were, but.
Yes, you see, the variance has to be necessary to enable reasonable use of the property. And it's hard to actually make the argument that in order to continue reasonably, you need a 2-car garage and it has to be, 4 feet over the line. Otherwise, you can't continue to reasonably use this house that's been used, it's been a house for 100 and some years. So that's actually, hard to make that argument straight-faced, although many an applicant has. And so the idea is to have that waiver flexibility to provide a little bit of room for those adjustments, and it's slightly less arduous criteria that you have to meet in order to qualify for the waiver.
Does a variance include a use variance?
No.
It does not. The one good thing about Vermont law, it doesn't have a use variance.
I don't know. I like use variances.
I'm just curious, where do the numbers in the waiver come from?
Those are essentially I wrote. They are, something that we probably will come back to. I'll take a second look at once we have all of the district numbers set up. But just sort of a sense of what would be reasonable to provide a little bit of flexibility but not completely allow the underlying zoning to be wiped away. That's sort of where we want to end up. And you actually don't need to be that specific. You could give the DRB broader authority. I tend to think that giving some strictures to exactly how much you can push that waiver is a good thing, so that things that actually are more substantial have to meet the harder test of the variance.
I like this chart because I think it gives clear direction to the GRB, which is what they've been asking for.
I also like it because I think it gives clear direction to abutters. So, if you come in and you want to build 2 feet from the property line, and it's not clear that you can or you can, I just think it's clearer for everybody. I might be able to tell better what could happen on the property next to mine when they're putting up an addition.
Yeah, for instance, the setback, I actually ended up working some of that language into the actual part 2, so this reducing based on the average probably doesn't have to be here anymore because that language has actually sort of gotten transported over to the zoning district language itself. We'll see that again when we come around.
So what are you saying there then about
that? Those will probably I probably end up being able to take those out, that front minimum and front maximum waiver, because you're going to be able to do that in most of the districts without needing a waiver. So as it's drafted right now in part 2. So that's one of the things where once we've got part 2 solidified, I've got to come back through this and cross-reference it back against it again.
Okay.
But
Yeah, there's some of it, maybe it's just the wording I'm not understanding, but like on side and rear, it says the maximum waiver can be 10 feet less than district standard, but not, well,
not less than
No.
5 feet total. So say if the district requirement was that the side setback be 20 feet, you could reduce that down to 10 feet. But if the side setback was 10 feet in the district, you could only reduce it to 5 feet. You can't ever get it closer than 5 feet to that house.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
So maybe that does need to be clarified.
Yeah, that was totally unclear to me as just like if I had was building, I mean, I didn't take it from an abutter's point of view, but it's like if I was putting a house on a property or something, and I was trying to understand those.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe there's a place where those are written somewhere else.
Well, the district
When I
standards
come
themselves
into
are
the-
going to be in part 2.
So when I come into the planning office to get my whatever I need, it'll be clearer there.
What the
Would
district standards
would
are.
it be clearer if it said less than 5 feet from the property line?
That could be the
Yeah, that's,
and
Gives me a
then
reference.
where it says building height, it says maximum 1 story or 10 feet more than district standard. Does that mean someone could go 1 story more, but that story can't be higher than 10 feet?
Now, some of the districts are measuring heights in stories, and some of them are measuring heights in feet. So the ones that are measuring in stories, you'd be allowed 1 story through a waiver, but the ones that are measured in feet, you'd be allowed an additional 10 feet.
so we're going to have both in our zoning.
Yes, the different districts have different ways of measuring height.
Do you see any potential problems there with, just because like story is pretty ambiguous as to what height would be inclined with that?
Well, story is actually defined through the definitions and through defining what attic and basement are. So there's a maximum. There's a system for keeping it defined. So
You'll see
we'll see that when we come through part 2.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
So if it said, depending on the criteria in each district, that might be clear.
And use variance is just not an option. It's not legal.
Yeah, it's not authorized in Vermont statute.
So you'd have to have a zone change if you wanted to have use of.
Or add a use to a district.
Yeah, we do have a system for adding, for if an unlisted use is similar enough to something that is listed, there is a mechanism for approving that. But yeah.
How does that work with a PUD? It's
Well, that is interesting because in statute, the PUD you could actually allow for uses that aren't allowed in the district.
That's right.
Most places don't do that because you're not required to allow for that. But in the statute, that's the one place where you could open it up more broadly. But the variance criteria is just for dimensional variances.
No, isn't there something like once it's a PUD, it's like always a PUD or something like that?
Well, I mean, it's approved that way. It's like a subdivision approval in that way. It could be amended in the future.
So in theory, you could at some point make it not a PUD anymore?
Theoretically, it depends on the ownership too of how it's set up. I mean, some of them would be easier to convert to something other than what they are than a PUD there's a lot of, if it's like a subdivision with a lot of common land and common ownership, you're gonna have trouble getting everyone to agree to uncommon it all and do something different with it. So, anything else in the waivers? I can go back through and try to clarify how these will work, but I think we should probably hold off on making final decisions on this table until we have gone through two and sort of have those dimensional standards a little more solidified, and then look at this in reference to it.
So, I'm sorry, I just keep hearing a lot that we'll understand a lot of this when we do part 2. Would it be more beneficial to go to part 2 now?
I would really like us to finish out 4 here. We're not going to keep running into part 2 problems in the other elements as much as we are right here with the waivers and the variances, because those refer specifically back, or particularly the waivers refer specifically back to the dimensional standards of the districts. We're not going to keep running into that in the future sections here.
Can I just ask, because I'm kind of curious, part of the reason we have some DRB members on the Planning Commission is to kind of get that cross-pollination. So you guys kind of seem a little quiet on this new way of doing waiver. And I'm just curious what...
Maximum waivers make me a little nervous. I get worried about being
restricted,
handcuffed, especially when there's just very unique. But then kind of also understanding, well, if it's extremely unique, they'd get a variance. So I'm out on how I feel about all.
I'm not being quiet because I don't like it.
Okay.
And so everybody who requests a waiver has to have a public hearing?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's at the DRB meeting?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
That was a double negative. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Yep.
Silence assumes assent.
That's right.
So let's look then a little bit more at 433, the variances.
Mm-hmm.
So there are set up in statute essentially these three types of variances. You've got your general variances, and then there's specific variance language for renewable energy structures, which I don't think is used a ton. And then there are specific criteria for granting variances in the flood hazard area, and that's another area where there's a tie-in that will go back to the flood hazard section for more specifics when we get to that in the future. But once again, this is something that these criteria are statutory. The process is specified by statute, so there's not a ton of flexibility here either.
I think this will be interesting because Brattleboro basically did away with variances except for sign variances when they instituted waiver criteria. So this will be, I think, a learning.
Although it never really went away because it was in statute, so you could have.
But our waiver authority was pretty broad.
Pretty broad, so it wasn't ever necessary to do a variance.
So, is this? I guess where my concern was with the waiver maximums was that in time it would force more variance hearings, which have much stricter standards.
I don't know though. I mean, I think if I look at the numbers as proposed, I would think that most of the waivers that have been issued it's the side setback, it's the rear setback, occasionally maybe the front setback. So, I think, and it's on the smaller lot, so it's in the residential where I think the side setback is 15 maybe. So allowing it to get to 5 feet is, I don't know that, I mean, we could research the waivers that have been granted. A lot of waivers came forward for additional, they were missing the square footage for that extra unit, and, this coverage is, the coverage is more generous, so maybe you can get there. We can research waivers if that would make you feel more comfortable, but
I guess so. I mean, I don't want to create unnecessary work. It
could be an interesting test.
Yeah, I just wonder if in the future it would create more more variances and give us less ability to make waivers based on very unique neighborhoods and lots and situations. And
I think we want the zoning right so that, from the start, so that you don't have to be issuing a bunch of waivers or variances.
I don't know. It gets hard with really historic neighborhoods, you know, where you're cramming in a lot of stuff, and a lot of stuff already doesn't conform. I'm not saying that I don't like it. I'm just I'm nervous, cautious about it.
But presumably, new zoning will eliminate a preponderance of variances and waivers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not the end all be all. I can always amend it in the future, anyways, if anything pressing came up. But I just get nervous about that handicapping of our waiver authority.
I think the communities that I have seen that have done this and have come up with some framework for the variant for a waiver was to try to ensure consistency over time, because depending on the makeup of the DRB, there could be quite wide decisions as to what is appropriate, and I think that's one of some municipalities that see that as a real problem,
Mm-hmm.
and are trying to work towards getting regulations that, you know, don't change. The interpretation won't change that much over time, depending on who's on the board. So that there's ongoing consistency. So I think that is one of the rationales you could look at for this, and see whether you think that has any benefit. So that, you know, I think it goes back to Sue's point too, that it gives the neighbors a better sense of what to expect through the process. We'll say that we'll come back around to give waivers a second thought after we've
Yeah. Again,
solidified the zoning districts a little bit more. And
maybe others, though, again, the language in this little table here was just, again, very confusing to me, being kind of a...
the criteria table.
Yeah, and
Yes.
maybe others understand it better because they're planners or whatever.
Fortunately, a good
But
chunk of that is straight out of the statute.
statutes again, it has to be there, okay.
There's a few of them that we could maybe try to help out a little bit, but we want to stick fairly close to the statutory language.
Yeah, no, I have no objection to that.
I liked the waiver criteria here because I thought, you know, it basically is variance light. We stripped out the couple of really tough criteria to meet with a straight face on the variance. And so I think what you're left with for the waiver is pretty easy to meet in most circumstances.
Okay, so then coming around to 434, site plan review. So this is the first of the development review processes that we've got laid out here for the Development Review Board. So we begin by running through what does require site plan review, and then the process for it. The criteria are in the table that follows on page 416, so we come to those and we can look at those in conjunction with all of the review processes. So
Is
I
this-
had a question. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, is this criteria list the same as the, somewhere I've seen something, if I'm coming in to develop a piece of land, there's all the things that I need to do and to meet those. Is that kind of what this is? Is that the same thing, or am I thinking of something totally, I mean...
I think, are you like thinking about some sort of like an application
Yeah.
checklist? I think that is a little bit different than this. These certainly could be components of them, may be part of an application checklist, but these are meant to be the things in figure 4-3 are the criteria that the Development Review Board would be using to review the applications themselves.
Which would be different a little different than the criteria that are things I have to provide?
Yeah, well, obviously, you're going to have to provide information to show that you meet this criteria.
Yeah,
So in
yeah.
some ways, there is a relationship there, but
We, in a earlier version that staff had reviewed, we kind of discussed with Brandy whether or not we wanted the application requirements in the zoning, and we didn't. We didn't want it in the zoning. It's part of the application. You get it.
So it's
it
not,
could change over time.
So again, it's not a confusing thing to an applicant, though. That's
No,
okay.
I don't think so.
You're asking from the DRB point. I have, when I read this, I'm pretending I'm an applicant.
Yeah, no, that's good.
And
Good hat to have on.
it's overwhelming sometimes. Sorry.
I think a little shading might help on this table, whether it's the checks or the dashes.
okay.
I had just a question about how the DRB determines whether the criteria are met. You know, do they use their judgment? Do they use the town plan? Do they use industry standards?
So we actually have, if we jump ahead to section 454, conducting a hearing and taking evidence. And then,
That's page 4-20.
yes, 4-20. So they have to, you know, collect the evidence that they receive at the hearing, take testimony, take any written evidence provided. That's essentially what they're supposed to be making the decision on. And obviously, the board members come with personal knowledge and information, which is going to be left at the door, but they are not supposed to be independently fact-finding, talking with people, things like that.
And ostensibly, it's the people are making their case, right? So if they haven't provided the evidence to convince the DRB, then it would be.
I think that the applicant has to make that demonstration. So back to the section 434 and the site plan review. Your current zoning has two levels of site plan, sort of a minor and a major classification. I recommend just simplifying that down and just having site plan review, and if it's a larger project, then it should be something that's conditional anyway, and so then it would go through conditional use review. And then you also have, I've followed the language that's in the current zoning, but I do want to draw your attention to it and have it give you some thought since we're doing a revision. On the bottom here of page 413, criteria 6 under 434A. So if there's a change of use from one non-residential use to another non-residential use, and you meet these criteria, then you don't have to come in for site plan review. So site plan review is the main tool by which there would be conditions placed on signage, landscaping, site design, essentially. So if they're not coming in, you don't have that opportunity to bring things into greater conformance with the standards.
The one area I guess I question about this, based on what you're saying, is that so like let me give an example first before I start talking. So someone has, like, let's say there's just this standalone commercial building and it was retail or something, and it's been there since like the 1960s, and someone comes in and they want to open like an office maybe, but office isn't allowed there. They could do it without having to get a site plan.
No, it has to be a lawful use, so it would have to be something that's allowed.
Okay.
So say the office is allowed.
Okay, so the office is allowed. They would just get a permit.
Yes.
Then.
As long as they could meet these criteria. So they're not changing the exterior dimensions of the building, they're not adding more parking, they're not changing the amount of signage on the property. But let's say that there's already, twice as much signage as there's supposed to be on this, under the current zoning of this property. Does the new business get to continue that forward and use all of that excess signage.
Yeah.
That type of thing. So that's the question, sort of the policy-oriented question. At what point of improvement to a property do you want to trigger? You have to start meeting the standards of the zoning.
Yeah, because in particular, we have, especially in terms of stormwater runoff and stuff, opening up a thing for site plan review has afforded us opportunities to bring, especially mostly, or most importantly to me anyways, environmentally into compliance with where they are at. I don't know how this section compares so much with how it happens now.
I
It's
have
like
a
change of
question.
use would be the trigger.
Sure, yeah.
That's what it is,
Yeah,
yeah.
the change of use, like, for example, I understand farming is a permitted use anywhere. So,
And exempt from site plan review.
But it has to meet the statutory definition.
okay, so let's pick something
Pick
else.
something else.
Like a gas station, like if you're changing something to a gas station, I would think that the neighbors would want to know at a minimum of that change, and that if it were just administratively done, then I would feel wronged if I lived next door and all of a sudden a change of use like that was occurring and
Is
it
there-
wasn't made clear to me.
Is there a place that a gas station would be permitted? That where is a place where a gas station is currently allowed that would affect?
Canal Street.
Maybe that was not a good example.
What?
Is a gas station not a good example?
Well, a gas station is an example of a use that I think should be reviewed.
Yeah.
So if there's a gas station that says a permitted use along Canal Street and currently you have a
Oh, it's not a residential.
house or other type of store, then I would want it to be reviewed. So I don't know about
Yeah.
the change.
Elsewhere in the zoning districts, we're sort of using the substantial improvement definition as a trigger point for meeting standards. And I'm wondering if working that into this language might not be more appropriate, so that there's some sort of, even if you are changing from one use to another permitted use, if you're making a major investment in the,
I thought about that too, but don't you think that they're going to underrepresent? I mean, we see it all the time on, because
Just
we usually
under the
ask, what's the
threshold.
value of the,
Yeah.
the improvements you're going to make, and even that, I mean, it's
yeah,
just,
it's an under.
I think they're kind of low. So I'm a little concerned about using that as a trigger, though I think it could be effective.
And sometimes, like convenience store in West Brattleboro was so controversial that if a change of use were of that nature, then I think the public wouldn't be served.
And I mean, the other thing to think about is from one category of use to
I was
another.
going to say.
So, I mean, if it's changing from a bookstore to, a hat shop,
Yeah,
versus changing,
that'll give you.
yeah, versus changing from the bookstore to the gas station,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I feel like a restaurant to a restaurant, if it's like a morning restaurant, all of a sudden it's going to evening restaurant, I mean, that's maybe a cause for,
It's a murky,
It's really
trying to
hard.
sort this out.
Is this also the place where, say it's just an empty, does this have to be a building already there? Is that what this refers to, or is there?
Yeah, number 6 is changing from one.
Or if there's just a piece of land that's,
That would definitely, if it was a vacant piece of land that was being developed, it would need site.
So if they were in a permitted use, and
this,
they wanted
yes,
to
all right,
change
I'm getting confused now.
they wanted
Is there
to change
exemptions?
to a conditional use.
That would go through the
that would-
conditional use, and that
okay.
incorporates the site plan review criteria.
So you're talking about 2 permitted uses.
Two permitted
but
uses.
I'm a little wary of that.
Is that similar to what we do now, though? I mean, do we really?
Right now, you do
We
see
for-
it.
We
Mhm.
do. Okay.
Yeah, one permitted use to another, I think you do see. Unless it's ground floor on Main Street, then you don't see it.
Other towns, have you worked with other towns that have adopted that section?
You see a range. It sort of depends on the philosophy of the policies of the community. Some want to encourage business turnover, and so do that by not triggering requirements for continue to reuse existing, development. And others, very much say, under all circumstances, all new commercial development has to go through site plan review. So you see, it really depends on the policy that the municipality wants to pursue.
In the communities that have adopted this, I don't know if you ever go back and see, like, have you seen any results from communities that have adopted that section? Like,
I don't. I would have to do a little more looking. I don't off the top of my head now. I luckily don't have to deal with administering the regulation.
What are the triggers that would make you worry? Lighting and noise?
Stormwater,
Yeah.
Building design. I mean, if we're going to move towards building standards, so it's the look of the building, it's stormwater, it's parking, it's sidewalks or lack thereof.
But that goes to the. At some point, are we going to implement some kind of a building design criteria anyway? I mean,
There's some in part 2.
I just think the use, like, it's a bookstore now, and it's going to become a restaurant or a bar, and I lived next door to it. I'd want to know. I'd want it to be warned and have a public meeting to know about it.
for me, it's not really the use. It's because you kind of, I mean, especially since it's non-residential, I mean, this is really only going to affect the commercial areas of town, Putney Road and downtown,
And you
and
already
people
have those.
to
You
people
live
to a
there,
certain
already have that
extent
stuff.
know what they're expecting.
It's
when they enter
non-residential
this
use to non-residential
to non-residential,
use.
yeah. So they know what they're getting into, that they're living next to a commercial area or above a commercial area. For me, I mean, my concern was not having some level of environmental not control, but you know, if there's, like, I can just think of like the properties that are really polluting the Crosby Brook right now, and you know, if they can just go from one permitted use to the next, and there's at no point in time where we can step in and say, hey, you need to, you know, put in more trees to deal with the stormwater runoff or something. That's really, that's one of my concerns, you know.
So there's nothing to stop the perpetuation of the problem.
Of the problem property, not not the types of businesses that are there, but the problem property itself.
site plan issue.
Yeah.
So
And
what
that's
would
the
happen
only
if we
chance
just
you
took
have.
6 out? I mean, then any non-residential use that's changing to another non-residential use would go through site plan review. Is that-
Essentially, unless you met one of the other criteria, they would run through 5. But essentially, yes.
What if, I mean, I do like the one that we have for downtown, that basically is if you're a first floor use, you know, changing to another one. I mean, I feel like in a mixed use building, I'm less concerned about it coming back. Maybe that's,
If you're not buying residential property.
Well, what if one of the, I don't know, just to assuage my fears, but what if one of the criteria would be that the property is in some way adjacent to or contributing to an impaired waterway?
Why don't we just get rid of it?
yeah, I mean, because I think that's not the only concern. I mean, for us, it's sidewalks. Everybody wants sidewalks on Putney Road. We're missing opportunities if sites get redeveloped and we don't make them have sidewalks. And,
Right,
you know,
maybe
generally
light
they have been
pollution
required.
issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
I'm totally comfortable just getting rid of it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to increase the volume of site plan review, but it seems like that might be fine. You know what I mean? In terms of actually trying to increase, you know, improve the stock of commercial properties.
And it's the opportunity to put standards in place.
Now, would we still be keeping though the urban core?
I can put that back in when the
Standard.
urban
I
center
think we
district
should put that
ground
back in.
floor
Yeah, because we don't require parking. And,
in there. So,
Yeah,
okay.
Does,
because I do want high turnover of businesses downtown. I don't want empty storefronts everywhere.
you don't want them to turn over, creating empty storage.
Well,
you want
yeah,
high occupancy.
Yeah, high occupancy. Yeah.
On your same concern about impaired, like the Crosby Brook thing, what about things like, when I think of, what's the building on Elm Street that has toxicity inside the building or within the building itself? I mean, is that in the same kind of category of what you're thinking of, David? Or is that a whole?
That's a
health-
special-
That's like health.
that's a special
That's like
case.
health department stuff. You know, that's not really.
EPA
It's not the
stuff.
same as.
That's EPA.
No, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, toxic.
The corner on the
It comes
one on
under
the
a whole
corner of
different-
Elm Street and Frost and
Yeah.
Flat,
That
near New.
They're actually
Theater.
fixing it right now, right?
The
The big
Detroit
yellow
diesel
one?
building.
Oh, the big yellow one? Are you talking about?
No, the brick building on
The brick
top.
building.
Built Detroit diesel factory.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, that is not. I mean,
That's a different set of
That's a-
standards.
That's a whole different level of.
Okay, all right.
environmental.
I just wasn't,
Yeah, no, it was more, my concern really was more of like things like the sidewalks and especially stormwater runoff where, you know, we're not getting a whole lot of new development in town, and the site plan really does allow us an opportunity to go back and fix mistakes made in past generations of development.
okay.
So I will rewrite that criteria and
Number 6?
yes, number 6. So the conditional use review, there's not a ton here in the setup. The uses that will require conditional use review will be in the use table indicated with Cs, and so we'll see that when we get to that. And so this just references the hearing process, the criteria that come below here. Same with the local Act 250 review. This just sets this up. Same process that we have now. And then section 437, the combined review. That's just language that authorizes the DRB to do combined hearings. So if a project requires more than one type of DRB approval, it can all be done in one process, in one hearing, and one, etc.
Woohoo. Makes sense.
And then the final section in here, section 438, discusses what happens if a plan approved by the DRB needs to be modified. As you remember, we had some authorization in the zoning administrator or the administrative officer section that allowed the administrative officer to make minor adjustments to things as development occurs, if there need to be small changes. But if you need to make a major change to the process, you basically, this would cover it. You go back through the same procedure that you went through for your original approval, and they're just going to look at the items in question that need to be changed. So then we come to figure 4-3, the development review criteria. And while these are not dissimilar to the language that's in your current zoning, it is perhaps a little more description, I think, of what is being looked for. Hopefully all these same elements are being looked at now, but try to, with the description of them, kind of write out the elements that should be.
This is the one I was talking about, the shading. I'm sorry.
Yes, I understood that.
Traffic isn't considered in the site plan review?
Not generated by the use. So the internal circulation inside the parcel is considered, but not the traffic generated. So the site plan review is for things that are permitted, and so the general assessment has already been made that that use is appropriate in the area. Well, for the conditional use review, the question is this use appropriate in the area, in which case you could look at how much traffic it might be generating as part of that process.
That's interesting. So we had a permitted use when Aldi's went in. Well, I guess it was the Act 250 that got caught up on the lights and the timing and the traffic and that kind of thing. But that was Act 250, and they have different criteria too. So
It was Act 250 because that was part of the PUD?
yeah.
I think this thing should be singled out in the table of contents or somewhere so that it's really easy for applicants to find.
Okay.
I expect this would be very helpful to them. Really helpful to the DRB too, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's good.
I guess that's why I was asking if this was similar to the list of criteria that they have to provide, because it just seemed very similar to me.
it should be quite similar.
Yeah.
This blank page on PUD.
Yes, there's a blank page on PUDs. There may end up being some different processes in here for the PUDs, but I'm going to wait until I write through the PUD section, and we'll do that in conjunction with the PUD
Because we were
standards.
going to do that anyways, weren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right.
Brandy, I wonder whether you've ever seen or whether you think it might make sense is to somehow explain how the development standards works with the development review criteria, and maybe as like a point of information in the document to.
The one thing I was thinking about doing in the draft, and I don't know if it's reflected in that original sort of table of contents outline I gave you, was when we get through part 3, which is where all the various development standards will be in part 3 of the regulations, of doing some sort of table of applicability what applies when, which might get at some of the points you're raising. I am trying in those sections as I write them to, in most of them, do an applicability section at the beginning that explains what this applies to, the standard.
Okay.
So it made my thought was to do a table in there somewhere. Whether that is something that ends up going, it could land in several places in the regulations. I think we could discuss where the best place is for it to land.
I don't think we can. It's all computerized. You can't. You can't.
Won't work?
No. It's all run on a computer system. I know. It's frigid.
So high tech.
The state building
Do you need
term
it?
from
Do you want
Montpelier.
something? I've got a
Must be
fleece
over
in my
here.
office.
Oh, yeah, you go.
You want? All right, I'm gonna. I got a rain jacket too. Yeah, you did.
I have a raincoat.
Sorry about
It's gonna be
that.
cold though.
Awesome, thank you.
If you get cold, I can.
I'm still here, but I'm going to listen when we're walking.
Yeah. Because, well, these are the development review criteria in this table. There will be specific elements in part 3 that, and perhaps even in part 2, that the project will also have to have met these specifics. So this isn't, exhaustive in and of itself.
Okay.
And you might notice that it does reference back to various sections, C section 311 for specific requirements on vehicle
Yeah.
access and circulation, stuff like
Yeah,
that. So there's specifics in there.
Yep. That's good.
Okay, so skipping 440 until we tackle PUDs. Moving along to 450. So these are the notice, hearing, and decision procedures. These apply to all of the different review processes that the DRB is responsible for. A lot of this is generally statutory. I tried to write out some of the elements that often are not specifically written out in regulations, that are sort of the underlying process of statute and zoning procedures, to try to be a little more descriptive for people.
I don't have a comment until 457. Does anyone have a comment? Submitting that?
Yeah, I was just thinking we should add the website to both 452A and B.
Yeah.
Yes, and I did have a note in there as well. As long as you are comfortable that you can technically and administratively make that happen, then I think it's a great idea to add that in. as
We
well.
actually need to now under
Yeah,
open meeting law.
technically,
So,
yeah.
we take down the website or we post it. So.
This is
We
in
have the
Jamaica.
staff, so we will post it.
Yeah.
That's right.
This is Jamaica.
Yes.
In the country, or you mean?
No, they
Jamaica,
have to
Vermont.
take down their town
Yeah.
website.
Several towns
Really?
have. Townsend has.
Yeah.
Because open
So-
meeting law changed, and you have to, if you're having a meeting, you have to post the agenda there. Brattleboro always has, but you also have to post minutes within 5 days of the meeting. You've always had to have minutes done
Mhm.
within that time, but if you have a website, you have to post it. Now, Brattleboro has a lot of staff, so we can do it, but if you are a
Little towns, yeah.
It's, in many cases, they have a volunteer that does the
Yeah,
website,
5
or
days
they
is
have
good
some
enough.
sort of company that they contract with that
Yeah.
does them, and I don't know that any of them turn over changes in 5 days.
I
yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if that's gone next year.
There's a lot of
I wouldn't,
unpopularity
yeah, it's
about
not
this.
very. And I mean, I have to say, in defense of other departments of the town, I mean, it's easy for us because we run boards all the time, but for somebody like the town manager's office that's overseeing all these committees,
It's rough.
that's not an easy task, I think, for certain. So.
That's just a technology training question.
Well,
you
it's
know
the
what I mean?
minutes. It's
actually
making sure
an
the
easy
minutes
task.
get.
It's just,
Yeah, but it's making sure the minutes get done, tracking down the minutes, getting them on. You know, if somebody else is typing them up, and it's not.
right.
It's that kind of
There's
stuff.
also municipalities who've always been very antsy about distributing unapproved minutes, draft minutes.
Yeah.
And so there's places that don't want their draft minutes being put up.
Hmm.
They have an objection to that.
What did you said up to 457?
Yeah, so.
So my other question was 456G. I thought it was just very difficult to understand, so I was asking if it could be stated in some way.
I will work on clarifying that a little bit. Just to explain the principle that's going on here, there's two elements going on in this 456G. So when you get your DRB approval, that triggers getting a zoning permit. So if the zoning permit has a lifespan of 2 years, let's say there was some possibilities for extending that 2 years. So if you don't actually get started, do the thing, get it going within that 2-year period, the zoning permit expires, the DRB approval will expire with it. So that if you wanted to get another permit to do this thing again, that you failed to do in the first 2 years, you would actually have to go back through and get the DRB approval again.
What does completed mean?
We will have a definition of substantially completed. It basically means that it has to be completed to the point at which you could get a certificate of compliance. It's got to be done enough so that it's safe to, use it, and it needs to have a roof and walls, and it doesn't necessarily need to have all the inside painted,
Yeah,
that sort of thing. Yeah.
But it can a commence also falls into that. So,
So
like,
if it's a
if they
use-
put the shovel in the ground the day before the 2 years, they're good to go.
Not if it's a
They've
construction
started.
project. The commence means that you're just starting a use. So you've got the building's already there, but you're starting the bakery. You need to be operating the bakery within that 2 years. If you're not operating the bakery by the end of the 2 years, the zoning permit elapses. The
So
approval
that
goes
the
with it.
use needs to commence, not the construction of
Yes.
the use.
Yes, the use needs to commence.
So if
So what if there's a construction project that takes substantially longer than?
You can get extensions.
You can get extensions for that base 2 years, and you can also do a phasing of it over time, in which case the underlying DRB approvals will go away.
Is that state regulation, the 2 year?
2 years is fairly standard. It's not in statute, but that's a fairly typical number. And we went through that language
Yeah,
last time.
last meeting. I think we did 3 years.
Did we do 3?
I think we did
can't
up to
remember.
3.
I would have
Yeah.
to go ahead and
I
look.
think it's 3.
3. So,
Yeah, I feel more comfortable with 3 years than 2, but.
So that has often not been clear in regulations, and so the idea was you got a DRB approval, it was good for all time, and you could, come back later and get your zoning permit for it, 10 years down the
Yeah.
road. So this
a real problem.
this clarifies that no, that is not the case. But once you do meet your requirements of your zoning permit, and you're up and you're going, and you met that and you're good, the underlying approval doesn't go away if you sell it, the business to somebody else, or if it, some other way changes ownership. So it goes with the approval goes with the land, but you have to have commenced it.
But you have to have what?
You have to have commenced it within
Commenced.
that period when you had the zoning permit to do so. So that's the underlying principles that are at work there, and I can work on the language. So 457.
Yeah, I like the definition of interested person, but I'm unsure that it has to be an interested person who participated in a hearing. Is there a law that says that?
Yes.
Yeah, when they're appealed to the environmental court, the court does not take any additional testimony. They only look at what the DRB did and then make a decision. So basically what we say at the DRB meetings is like, if you want to say anything, now is your one and only chance, because you will not be able to make any additional testimony, even if you're an interested party.
And this is the case whether or not you do the on-the-record review. You have to have participated in the local hearing and procedure process in order to appeal it to the state.
And if you're part of that group of 10, did the whole group of 10 have to be part of the hearing? I don't think so. I mean, we did this when the Dollar General was going to come in on the land by the Chelsea Diner.
No, all 10 don't have to speak. I think you have to organize yourself as a group and
You have to
have one
organize
person.
yourself and have a
But somebody
representative.
And represent
There has to be
as
a representative has to
had been there,
had to have been there
because
and
I don't
spoken.
think, because I know I
Yeah,
was
you wouldn't
part
all
of that
have
group
to
of 10 and I
have
wasn't
attended.
there.
No.
But that group had to have already been formed.
It can be formed at the meeting, but yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a document to be a group?
You have a sign-in
Yeah.
procedure, so they would have to have identified themselves as a group. In the sign-in procedure.
So you become, in essence, a corporation and you are then treated as a person. Purposes of appealing, you are then an interested person because you're the
Or doing lots of other things.
Hello. Sorry I'm late.
Almost done with part one.
So we fixed the whole skate park problem right there. So
So anything,
it's okay. Just joking.
anything else on conducting a hearing, taking evidence? That's section 454.
We're almost except David.
So we talked a little bit about that already.
Yeah.
She's got
And
David's sweatshirt.
recessing a hearing. So that just gives the DRB the authority to recess a hearing and to resume it as necessary. And then the procedures that they have to follow when they issue and the timeframes for issuing decisions. And so that decision to take it. And that's all statutory.
There's section 456. I don't know if this is clear there. I remember watching one of the DRB meetings recently, and there was a question about I guess it had to be clarified to the applicant that even though an issue was voted on and approved, a site plan or whatever it was, at the meeting, that wasn't necessarily the conclusive thing until the written report came, because the written report was the final piece, and that's...
Yeah, I think it's more of a procedural thing that they often would. DRB members, correct me if I'm wrong, they'll often give an indication of which way it's going to be, but then they do clarify this is, you got to wait for your written decision because there is a decision just going to have the conditions.
Well,
I don't want to be too specific here,
yeah, no, it's been a recent debate lately because typically the standard is that no indication at all is given during the DRB. They just take the testimony and close the hearing, and that's it. And you'll find out later whether or not you've been approved.
Yeah.
The Brattleboro Development Review Board tends to, and does so very successfully, vote at the meeting, basically to help the people know which way things are going, so that someone is not stuck in standstill for 45 days.
Yeah, that's not a short period of time.
But occasionally it does give rise to us having to backtrack.
And they certainly don't have to wait the full 45 days to issue.
Yeah.
It can be done more quickly. And the DRB has the authority to make those decisions in open session or to do deliberative sessions.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to me. It was a whole new kind of awareness about the DRB process.
Yeah, it's something of ongoing debate
Yeah.
internally between us.
All right, that's, do you guys know?
Okay, so the last element here in part 4 is enforcement, chapter 460. So there are 2 avenues essentially for enforcement of these regulations. One is through the municipal civil complaint ticket, which is essentially the traffic ticket approach. And that's good for one sort of violations. Things like sign violations, for instance, are often handled that way because they are sort of these sporadic, ongoing things that the notice of violation is not very effective at dealing with. And then there's the notice of violation, which is a, more of a thing like if you have built your building within the setback, that type of thing. It's probably, you'd go with the notice of violation, whereas if you were putting out an illegal sandwich board every third day, you'd probably use the complaint ticket approach to solving this problem.
So do they give first, I don't really know how the enforcement side of stuff works, so do they give like a warning first and then ticket?
Usually.
Well, that's
Usually
the
warning.
difference between these 2 mechanisms. The ticket is, you can just go out and issue tickets like you could for illegal parking type of thing, that avenue. The notice of violation does require notification of the violator and give them 7 days to fix the problem. If they don't fix it, then you can proceed to court action from there.
Right.
And does that really happen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So there was a question about the ticketing, the charges for the offenses and things like that. This is somewhat set up by the statute, but not entirely. You have a maximum amount of $500 that you can use to fine someone under the municipal civil complaint ticket system, and the waiver fee has to be less than the offense fee penalty. But other than that, those are the only real numeric numbers. This is a frequently used schedule, and I don't know exactly where it arose from.
I did see it from VLCT.
I think it's maybe VLCT's.
Vermont League of Cities and Towns, what they recommend.
Yeah.
So does waiver mean that if they correct it, they'll get half the penalty back?
No.
What does
No.
waiver fee mean?
It's like you're not going to contest it, you're just going to pay the fee and acknowledge that you did wrong and pay
Just
the
like a
$50.
speeding ticket or a parking ticket.
If you want to go to
contest
court,
it,
then you're going to get up to the $100.
Right. And if you don't contest it and just pay, then you just pay the face value of the ticket.
And fix the problem.
Yes.
In theory.
Can we footnote that, or can we, because that's the second, and I had to look it up, I didn't know what the
Yeah, that might be worth a
fee
footnote.
was. I mean,
Yeah, I think just clarifying, because the way it's written, if you don't understand what it means, it seems like someone is making an arbitrary decision about whether you're getting fined $100 or $50.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's my concern a lot with these kind of ticket things, and in particular, smaller cities where people know each other, and I just foresee a future situation where there might be an overzealous enforcement officer who is,
Just the one?
Who again, who is the enforcement officer? Anyone?
That would be the zoning administrator.
Just Brian.
Now that's Brian, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm just always of the mindset of like, you get one warning. I just the whole idea of just doling out tickets. It just doesn't seem very business friendly to me.
I think that'd be hard to, it's interesting because that's almost like a management question as opposed to like something that would go in here. Because, I could see where our zoning administrator might be really busy and then a disgruntled person would come in and point something out and then he would need to go investigate it. But if that's the only way that people are being ticketed for violating stuff, then that's not particularly fair. Or if not obviously our current zoning administrator, but we have a different zoning administrator who is zealous. So it's sort of like, it sort of seems like an internal management question as to how would you make sure that the person is ticketing people sort of in a
fair way.
Well, I think
my other concern is too is you have like, let's say you have the first time ever business owner right out the gate really trying hard, and then they make one mistake and it's like, hi, welcome to the neighborhood.
Well,
Here's your first violation.
I think it's a false assumption to think that we're just out there ticketing.
No,
that there aren't those conversations that go on. I mean, right now I don't think we do ticket. And
We have the ability to use this system for sign violations, and we are very reluctant to use it. And part of that is that the ticket book is a highly prized. The ticket book is issued by the police department, and so actually they're really reluctant to have law enforcement officers have access to a ticket book, so it's kind of a big deal.
Why even have?
This is law enforcement.
What's that?
This is law enforcement.
It's a law enforcement of a kind. It's not the same part of the code. So that's the first issue. The second issue is, just as in the matter of whether a police officer is going to give you a speeding ticket or a warning, or a friendly exchange rather than a less than friendly exchange, is a matter of the police chief and the management structure of the department and what they understand to be their priorities and what their best approach is. And so it would be a management question for the town manager and the planning director, insofar as they would direct the zoning administrator. Because we are a small department and because this is a relatively small town, we are responsive to complaints, so we have an obligation if somebody calls or writes and makes a complaint to investigate the complaint. If we find that the complaint has a basis in truth, then we're obligated to enforce.
This isn't just about things that come before the DRB. This is about any planning, zoning violation.
Anything. You call up and say you think that your neighbour's garage happens to be 2 feet closer to the fence than it was yesterday, and then we have to come out and move it. Whether you're having paranoid delusions or whether they moved it in the middle of the night, doesn't matter. We have to come and investigate. Sometimes they've moved it, sometimes it's a paranoid delusion. So then we measure it. If we find that it's actually 2 feet closer to the fence than it should be, they get a violation notice. They get 14 days to cure, which is the terminology we use to, you fix it, or come and talk about it. Sometimes, actually, if you mistakenly place the building too close to the boundary line, it's a little difficult to fix it.
A lot of times curing it is going before the DRB
and you get a waiver.
So the
not a
municipal
monetary.
civil complaint ticket, though, they're not getting any warning at all that they've...
It's really for those. I would imagine it's being used when you've been told several times that sign is not supposed to be there and it's not working, and it's and
you've been ignored and there's been no response, no one's come to talk to you.
You sent letters saying you cannot have that sign there.
Frequently, people...
It's the most, has the best shot of being...
Right. People visit the office and ask what permits they need, and if they're going to have a business, they ask what permits they're going to need, and we walk them right through. You're going to need a sign permit. The existing sign section of the ordinance, as you know, is chunky and difficult, and is old. Nevertheless, people in the office know how to use it. We spend plenty of time explaining to plenty of applicants exactly how the sign ordinance works, and tell them, and often they use a commercial sign producer to produce their commercial signs for them, and we're happy to work with those professionals. When we work with the professionals, it goes off pretty much without a hitch because they understand what's going on, and then we're not that different, wildly different from other communities that they work in. But it's just, there's a certain number of those people who then turn around and go, okay, I know what I need a sandwich board sign, and they don't call and get a permit or don't ask first, and so then they get the friendly letter, which is, notice you had a sandwich board.
Getting a notice.
Yeah, and then repeated violations will get a...
I guess what I'm saying is that I if they're going to get... I would like to see some structure to that. if they're going to get a notice, I would like.
Let me try and put it this way, David. The question that you're asking is a question about the management of this section of the ordinance, not whether that language should be encoded in the ordinance or not.
All right, let's move on.
And so
I'm done.
it's a management question.
So I would say that most of the places that use the municipal civil ticket use it for the repeat offense purpose.
Yeah.
I think most every place would start with a phone call, a stop by, or a letter, and really only go to this for things that just they're not getting any response to. I think the one problem with writing in here specifically, that what you're getting at, that you'd like to, step one is contact the person, is that this is usually used for the repeat offense. So becomes a little squirrely to word that in there, that, this person has been notified when, in the past year, in the past 2 years, that they can't have their sandwich board blocking the sidewalk.
So
Sounds like
in
what-
reality, the police or whomever has the right to ticket immediately, but they may choose to contact the person first.
Yeah.
Same as same as a traffic stop. They can ticket you, or they can talk to you about the possibility of ticketing you. And it's not, I'm sure it feels randomized and not very pleasant when it happens, but I'm sure if you were to ask the police officer, they've received training that enables them to establish whether the most appropriate response is a warning versus a ticket, and it might have to do with your age or a whole bunch of other variables that they think are worthy of using their discretion for. So all I'd say is that this is pretty standard language, and the question of how it's to be implemented on a day-to-day basis would be a management decision.
Other questions or comments on the enforcement? Okay.
Yay.
Woohoo, we finished chapter 4. And that brings us around to part 2. So I think you all got, in addition to the lengthy portions of part 2, to look at a memo for me discussing a little more broadly some of the rationale and thought behind these sections. There's a lot of content in here to wade through. I think the way I would like to see us approach it is that we can talk about this first chapter on the general setup pieces and the use of the dimensional standards text. But I'd like to go through the tables, the use standards table, the dimensional standards table in conjunction with each district, so that we look at the uses that are allowed in that district and the standards, the dimensional pieces for that district in conjunction with the section.
I think that's a great idea. My comment was that I would rather have these tables after I read which zone was what.
That's something we can move them to sit somewhere else in the document without too much trouble.
So you want you'd prefer the tables at the end?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Because you're hit with a lot of letters and numbers that don't really mean anything until you've read it.
Yeah, that was all totally overwhelming to me. I just kind of looked
I
at
had
it
to
and went,
have, this page as a little cheat sheet.
And the map, will the map be included in the
I should have
section?
called you
So
up
people
and asked you how to
can
do it. I
that
just don't know.
immediately so they know what area they're
I
in?
think that, in terms of producing a document, the map would be close to the front and sort of freestanding.
Okay.
Certainly, for your use and the DRB's use, imagine something like a 3-ring binder and it's all tabbed, so you'd be
There's a
using...
map somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably close to the front.
Yeah, a small scale version of the map is usually included in. We may need to do a blow up, do it
Right.
2-page type of thing so that we can get some of your smaller districts to at least kind of figure out what they are.
And then for people who are wishing to make an application, we would be directing them to Maps Online. as a first step in the process, and that has a layer that will show them which zoning district they're in. So that's pretty painless.
So this begins here with establishing the zoning districts in section 201. Those are grouped into 3 groupings. The developed zoning districts, basically all the zoning districts for the most part within the sewer service area, rural zoning districts, and then special purpose zoning districts. There's been, some of these are the same as are in your current zoning, and then there's been some consolidation of districts into some new districts. And, so what you've got in front of you tonight, what's been distributed to you, is the developed zoning district set, and coming soon to you will be the rural and special purpose, and eventually the overlay zoning districts as well. So,
Oh, sorry, so 220
yeah.
is that one developed?
Yes, for the developed zoning districts. So this just is, section 201 just establishes these. Similarly, section 202 establishes overlay districts. There's definitely going to be a flood hazard overlay district, and then we're going to talk about these others and how to deal with them when we get to them.
Those other 2 are new.
Those other new are new, and they're optional, and some different ideas to play around with. So one of them would sort of be a riparian type of setback area district, and the other is the historic district that we talked about in previous meeting. More to come on those. Then section 203, the official zoning map. This just is some legal language describing what the actual official zoning map is. When this is all said and done, you'll end up with a large-scale map that is the official zoning map. In which case, if there is some dispute about where lines are, that's the map that's pulled out and measurements are taken off of it.
Probably on the wall in the planning office.
You
Okay.
get it signed off on and stamped?
No, we haven't.
You didn't do that? Some municipalities do that. The clerk signs and certifies that this is the official zoning map.
No, we just press print.
So,
Can I just, so as we develop the overlay districts, someone who, they would say, oh, well, okay, my place is going to be in the village center. They go and they look at the requirements for that. And then they also see that, say it's in the flood hazard overlay, they would then go and look at the requirements for that. And you are double checking, so I'm assuming that there's different, there would be no conflict between those? Are they addressing completely different?
no.
There's often conflict.
So the
I
overlay
would say
may
frequent.
supersede
Yeah,
something?
there's a prevailing presumption in land use law, as there is in most law, which is the stricter requirements prevail.
Okay.
So if, say you're in the village center and your rear setback is, 20 feet, and then it says in the special flood hazard area that it has to be 100 feet from the back line, then that's what it is.
Okay.
Whichever is the more severe is the one that applies.
So in the case of the flood hazard, they take precedence over everything else. And in particular, that one.
And again,
It's just the way it's set up.
if you were to approach that's the first thing that we would want to establish. And we basically work with kind of a mental list of everything that's in the special flood hazard area. And so it doesn't take very long to go, hang on a minute, I think you're in a special flood hazard area. And so then that's what you're working with.
So then I've referenced that the map is located in appendix. If we move, then we drop the map somewhere else in the document. I'll just reference where the map goes when we drop it. The section 204 just sets up a procedure that describes how the boundaries are going to be interpreted. Once again, there's some question about how to interpret them. As we've been doing reworking the districts, for the most part, we've been trying to follow property lines. So that will hopefully cut down on the need to interpret where zoning district boundaries lie for most applicants. There's still going to be some properties that are going to be in more than one district, but it should be far fewer in number when we're done with this process. So hopefully there'll be less of these disputes.
Do you want to say what happens when your parcel occupies 2 zoning districts?
The zoning administrator gets a headache, and then
If it's a large enough parcel and the area of disturbance or the area of development is all in one zoning district, and then obviously is the one that applies if a decision has to be made, you know, if it straddles.
I did take out the language that lets you push the zoning districts
Yep.
back and forth, the 30 feet or whatever.
Right.
The idea being that since for the most part we've got them following the property boundaries and there's less need to be doing that.
Right.
You know,
So then the stricter again would prevail.
Yeah, that would be my assumption. Yeah.
It's a dumb question, but, so I get the flood hazard one, that makes sense, but as far as what zoning districts are, give me an example of where there's a parcel with 2 different types on it.
I can right now on Western Ave.
Yep.
There is, right now, well, even if you look right here, this is going,
Right.
so this is residential right now, it's cutting. You have to look at the black line.
the black lines are your current zoning
Or
boundaries.
right up here, this is exit 2. There's a, what is it, residential office, I think that cuts on the front of all those parcels that are
Yeah.
then residential in the back.
Oh.
So it's pretty common right now because a lot of times you just do a measurement from the street.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Not following parcel.
you know, zoning maps generally were created prior to there being good parcel mapping, and so the most common way to set up the districts was to do them a certain distance back from the road. And so you end up with a lot of this deals where the zoning district boundaries fall in the middle of lots, in the middle of buildings, things like that. So now that we have very good parcel mapping, pretty good parcel mapping,
Did you guys miss it?
it's a lot easier to draw the districts to follow property boundaries or other features. In some cases here are following like a stream, so there may be property that has a parcel that has land on both sides of the stream, but the stream is the boundary, so it's a clear kind of physical
What
place
happens
to
if
be
there's
bounded.
an adjustment?
In the stream?
Or no?
Yeah.
No, actually, that's a serious.
That's a serious
That's a serious question,
No,
and there are
There's
consequences.
a serious answer to that.
Yes, there is.
Yeah. In the boundaries, like if you have a parcel and someone, let's say you have a parcel in one district and a parcel in another, and
do a
someone
lot line
decides
adjustments.
that they want to buy this one and merge the 2 parcels together, where, what?
Yeah, we have a language in
Yeah.
section 204, a boundary line adjustment, lot merger, or subdivision that changes the location of a lot line will not change the location of any zoning district boundary that follows that lot line. So
So
the
then
zoning district
it
boundary
would-
will not change in that case, but if the stream moves, the zoning district boundary is going to move
With the stream, that's right. As does the property line, but the property line doesn't necessarily
It depends on how the deed
is written. So there's been case law recently where people have been able to look across the brook and go, "That's mine," and it's become the property of the person on the other side of the brook, and vice versa.
There's land in Waitsfield that nobody owns now.
That's
because of
right.
this.
There's also islands,
Oh, yeah.
islands that have opened up that are obviously broken off somebody's parcel, but there's not a description that fits that piece of land, and so it's ownerless.
It's a gore.
Returns to the.
It's a gore. That's right.
I love that. I love that. That's awesome.
Now you know what we do at lunchtime. It's how we geek out.
Yeah.
Yep. Isn't that good?
Okay. So then we come, if there's nothing else here in chapter 200, we'll move right along here to chapter 210, the use and dimensional standards. So this is quite a bit of restructuring from your current zoning, but it's pulling pieces that were in various places in the zoning. So it discusses the table, figure 2.1, with the principal uses and the conditional uses in the table. The first paragraph deals with permitted and conditional uses. Accessory uses, there will be a whole section on accessory uses that'll sort of be self-defining, so that just references to that. And we're coming up with something different here. Number of uses on a lot. This is a change from your current zoning a bit. So you can have any combination of permitted or conditional uses and accessory uses on a single lot or within a single building. So that's basically authorizing mixed use townwide.
I like
As long
that.
as those uses are
Yeah.
allowed in the zoning district.
It's better than the secondary use thing. That's
Yes,
just so
and then
confusing.
it gets rid of the need to have that secondary use stuff
Yep.
that you have in your contract. And then I referenced this earlier, this unlisted uses. This is the mechanism by which if a list is not listed in the table and somebody wants to propose something that's not there, there's a mechanism here for determining whether it's similar enough to something that is listed to be allowed. And that's what unlisted uses are, materially similar uses.
I thought the materially similar uses was good too because it bypasses the need to go to the DRB. It's pretty clear what the
Yeah.
administrative officer is, and we've had a lot of that stuff kind of go
Yep.
up to the DRB.
And
It's
if, if the applicant isn't happy with the administrative
They can go.
officer's decision,
Then
they
they
can
go
just
to
appeal that to
DRB.
the DRB, and so
Right.
you then.
We
need
had
to
a really hard time with that with the medical marijuana because it was like, is it an office? Is it a medical office? Is it, well, people can't actually go in. Is it retail because they're technically buying something? It was really hard.
And what did you decide?
You're just thinking, what did we decide?
I think we ended up, well,
They
because,
can't remember.
because the tricky
Yeah.
part was that if it
Tells you
was
everything.
one use, it was there was something where it was allowed to be within so many feet of something, but if it was considered a different use, it.
I think you guys went medical office or office. You didn't do retail. I
You
think.
didn't do retail,
No.
it was a medical
Yeah.
office.
Yeah, that makes
Because it was a
sense.
prescribed, because
You had to have a prescription.
you have to have a prescription, and then
there was something about the definition of a medical office.
Yeah, that
didn't
didn't-
fit what the state restrictions on a dispensary are.
somebody spent a lot of time figuring out that that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So any questions or comments there in 211? Now we'll do 212, this similar idea here, running through the dimensional standards. So this references back to the waiver and variance language that we just looked at in part 4. It references back to the nonconformity language that we looked at previously in part 1, and it references to the PUD language that we will be looking at some future point in part 3. So those are all of the options for ways to do development that doesn't meet the dimensional standards, and other than that, you got to meet the dimensional standards. So those are your outs to dimensional standards.
I had a question for 212, and then I realize now that I'm looking at it, I realize I just read it wrong, so ignore that one that I emailed you.
You have hers.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think.
So 212C follows up on that idea of being able to allow multiple uses, and this deals with how many principal buildings there can be on a lot. This is always a point of much interest and dispute in zoning, whether there can be one principal building on a lot or more than one principal building, and then if there can only be one, what actually accounts for a principal building versus not. So more things to discuss at lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get back to on that one.
We've had that discussion.
We have actually.
More than one.
So this says that you can have multiple principal buildings on the lot, except if one of them is a detached single-family home, you can only have one of those. You can only have one detached single-family home on a lot. And the reasoning behind that is that things get really weird when you put a couple of single-family houses on a piece of property and then later they want to divide them up because usually they didn't think about it ahead of time very well.
I thought we'd get along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you end up with something that you actually try to have to create lots out of something that can't legally be plotted out. And it's a mess.
So you can't do an in-law?
You can do an in-law apartment as an
They have to be
accessory dwelling.
as an accessory dwelling, so it has to be not principal.
The principal.
It has to be
Accessory.
And commune, we're just commune.
Well, you still have the PUD option that you could go through to approve the commune or to approve putting multiple homes on a single common piece of property.
In commune is not a reference to Westminster West. Okay, it's just
It would, however, need that PUD approval.
Is this whole section 210, just in my simple mind, is this kind of almost like, it's not really definitions, but it's just further explanations of each of these things that give
Yes.
the DRB and the applicant a wider, because there's not specifics in terms
No,
of setbacks.
this is the structure of how these things are going to be
Yeah.
used and interpreted
Okay.
in the tables that follow. But that principal building one, this is a change to your regulations, so that it does clarify,
Yeah.
how that will work. And then, yeah, it starts running through the various criteria, the street frontage, and then these are all specified within each district in that table where they need to be.
I'm sorry. Are we moving on? I have a question for 212H when we get there.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can
Basements
probably
in
go
the attic
there
man again.
unless somebody had something before then. So here we are at height in 212H.
Yeah, would antennas fall in that under the 212H1?
Hmm.
Oh, yeah, there's a whole list.
I thought I saw antennas somewhere.
Antennas are covered separately.
They are covered up in part one. I will double check that we're clear that the antennas
Does
are clear
antenna
of
include
heights.
like dish too?
Antennas are not affected by this height requirement.
Yeah, they're not supposed to be, so I'll just make sure. I think that it's clear enough in part one that
Right.
they're exempted, but I'll double check it.
Then there's a bizarre history to the exemption of antennae.
We talked about that, didn't we?
Yeah.
I was asking about that.
Yeah. Does this have something in here about, oh, never mind.
What about how? Okay, hold on. Sorry. So, like, if someone wanted to put in, for instance, like, let's say they wanted to put in a rooftop patio and they wanted to build something so that just so it was shaded or something, for vines or something like that.
Retractable roof.
Something like that. Would that be
more permanent.
That's what I went to in New York City.
Height limits do not apply to Belfast fire.
It's very nice.
I would assume that.
But would that be the part where it says similar architecture features not used for human habitation?
Yes.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, so what if you have a steeple and you store stuff in it?
You can store stuff in it. People can't live in it.
Right.
So I think if your example, if it's an open structure on the roof, then you're probably not going to
It's
be
a
habitating in it.
Like a
But
pergola
if you
that has
enclose
vines
it
growing over it.
and try to make a room out of it, and it's over the height limit, that's when you have a problem.
If it's enclosed, I think we actually have a definition of a room in a structure, and it has to have 3 walls and a roof at least to count. And so under
Does
that,
vegetation count as a wall or a roof?
No.
No, all right.
and so but a pergola. So a pergola would be
Wouldn't be.
an appurtenance on the outside of a building, or it's not a structure.
And
But
you
if
have
it
to
was
remember-
if it was a glassed-in patio with a roof, then it's part of the structure.
Yeah.
that these would also have to be over the height limit for the district. So for instance, if you did want to do a house that had a cupola that had living space in it, or a tower that had living space in it, a friend of mine had this beautiful tower that they put the master bathroom in, and had this beautiful Adirondack view. Then she divorced the man who built her that house.
She had the wrong lawyer.
Did she keep the house? No, she didn't keep the house. No, that's what she went
moved
wrong.
out.
You're supposed
Yeah.
to divorce the guy and keep the house. Come on, you know.
That's
But
great.
yes, as long as that tower bathroom was under the height limit, you wouldn't have a problem about using
Right.
it as part of the
Yeah.
living space. It's only if that was going to be above the height limit that then, and
Yeah,
that gets
okay.
back to the discussion we had, I think, at the previous meeting about the height limits being really triggered by fire department.
Yep,
and safety
60 feet.
concerns.
So what happens when you have a building like the Hooker Dunham?
We worked through that example very carefully.
Uh,
Yeah. So
Where do you measure from? Street level? Where the address is, like Main Street?
we've settled on that in that instance.
Different heights
The
of
fire
buildings,
department
different
has the
street
ability to get to the top of it from Main Street. I think it causes them some level of anxiety about what would happen on the railroad side, because they could only really get up 4 floors. But so it would be instantaneously kind of in a 7-alarm fire. It's basically what would happen. They would probably come at it from both sides.
If it was on the railroad side of the street?
No, either
maybe?
side would be trigger 7 alarms.
well, what
So
if
they
we-
would pull Keene and Greenfield straight away. Because they would need the ladder trucks from all those 3 sites. And then they'd need coverage for here, for another fire here while they're doing that. So it's 7.
The example
big.
that I had brought up was like on, for instance,
It's bigger
Flat
than the Brooks
Street
House.
is so much
Really?
lower
It would
than
be bigger than the
Elliott,
Brooks
but
House,
if you
yeah.
had the Emerson
That was
building
big.
that spans too,
Mm.
you know.
So some of this gets at the measuring in stories rather than in
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of that is dealt with by dealing with that. So we also have a definition of attic and a definition of basement and a definition of story. And those 3 definitions work together to deal with these oddities in the landscape. So a basement
Is that in this back
It's
section? where
back in
the
the
Yeah,
defined
definition-
terms.
Story is
Yep.
on 5-15.
Yeah, and basement is
Five
on
what?
5-15.
5-15.
All right.
So a basement will be considered a story if its ceiling height is at least 6 feet above the average grade along one of the building walls. So there's several ways of getting at measuring this, and we can take some real-world examples and get at it. But basically, that is a walkout. You can walk out of that onto grade.
That's a
essentially.
story,
That's
not
a
a
story,
basement.
not a basement at that point.
So to use the Hooker Dunham example, that's the very first floor on the railroad side is a story.
Right, and the back of Emerson's would be a story.
Yes, on Flat Street.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or like a split level
Of course,
house.
that makes sense.
Yes.
Makes our house a
The
story.
split story is split is
Yeah.
is the lower story is first floor.
And then going up, there's the definition of attic, which sort of decides whether that space under the roof is enough to count as a story or not. And that's dependent on how much of it has a full height.
Will you have any graphics?
I will have illustrations.
That'd be
Yeah,
useful.
because
Yes.
there can be
Yep.
gables, but there can also be
Yep.
this kind of thing, and
Mhm.
you only have so much standable.
Yes. So this is written right now as definition that it would be a story if it's 60% or more of the floor area has 7 feet essentially of ceiling, floor to ceiling height. So,
I love definitions.
yes.
Is there anything about mezzanines?
There is, it's not in.
There is.
There is a thing about mezzanines here in stories. It's on the back of page 2, on 2.6. So if a mezzanine extends beyond 33% of the floor area, it counts as a story. So if it's more than a third of
Are there many mezzanines?
What?
Are there many mezzanines downtown? I mean, obviously Rochester, but
The library.
yeah, it's true.
And the,
Yeah, it's just like the ultimate
Twice Upon a
developer
Time.
trick to sneak in more square footage.
Yep.
I don't know if there's even any place you could do that downtown.
Artisans has a mezzanine too. And the upstairs where the art gallery is, that's considered mezzanine.
Right. There's a couple. There might even be something buried. Have you been to every
Twice
room in
upon
Hooker
a
Dunham?
time.
Have you ever been in every space in there? Is there anything in there? I'm wondering if one of those apartments doesn't have a mini mezzanine.
As opposed to a loft.
Anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, yeah.
I think they do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So back on page 2.5, this definition, we've got this definition of height. We left in the idea that anything that would go over 60 feet from the lowest point to the highest point would need that fire department review. And that would be adding on to something too that was already at or approaching that height. And then there's more language here about defining heights for stories. Because that's the one thing that you run into when you measure things in stories. You could end up with the A-frame, the giant A-frame. I was told once in Waitsville this was the downfall of the earth, would be the giant, really high A-frame building up on the mountain.
Wait, what was the downfall of it? I'm sorry.
That was gonna be it because they had this loophole. The planning commission had identified this major loophole in their regulations that would have allowed it to be. They were just hoping nobody would realize that they could have built a giant A-frame and get away with it up on the mountain.
I'm so sad it didn't happen.
So for residential buildings, the story must be at least 8 feet and no more than 16 feet. So So this would make me think that if you had a top story that was 7 feet, it would not be a story.
Yeah, that's true.
Except your attic is saying that.
7. I should probably make those 7 here. This one should probably be 7 too. 7 feet is still adequate for residential story.
Though, not really.
No, I do. It doesn't really kind of require 8.
Basketball.
When I do this, that's 8.
My second floor is only like 6 foot.
So then would you
Really?
make the attic, the 60% of the attic 8 feet to make it?
I mean,
That's like that John
In Westby.
Malkovich movie.
So my taxes would
I think I mean, I'm sure you could get away with 7 with code, but I guess the practical minimum that they work with is something like 7,
Yeah.
because it's the members from the floor above and the sheetrock, and you get down to
code is 7 feet.
yeah.
What districts use stories as
The-
I mean, because one of my concerns is like, modern retail spaces like to have very high ceilings.
So
There's open offices and stuff like that.
yes, if you look at the table on page 213, you'll see that there's minimum height and maximum height. So 3 of the districts have a minimum height of 2 stories: the urban center, the village center, and the mixed use district. And then 2 of them have a height that's in feet, 24, and 3 of them have a height that's in 24 feet. And that gets at your point about single-use commercial buildings. 24 feet in the service center, neighborhood center, and rural business districts. So that while you could have a single-use, single-story commercial building, it needs to have a front facade and height that's a little more substantial, so it sort of gets rid of that low boxy building thing.
Is there a good reason not to just use feet?
Well,
Because feet doesn't do it all, I guess, right?
yeah, and the one thing that feet doesn't do very well is encourage interesting roofs. So one of the reasons about going through stories is that you're not penalizing someone who does something more creative with the roof. So if you do a steeper roof pitch, or you do the cupola or tower or something like that, that gives some interest to the roof of the building.
This is how the A-frame thing happened.
The A-frame never got built, but they had a vision that it could have gotten built.
You know, a nightmare that it could have
Yes,
gone
it would
with.
have been more of a nightmare. So that's the rationale. It's more of a design idea that if you say the maximum height's, 40 feet or 60 feet, the idea is to try to get your maximum story height, your maximum number of stories in on that height, and you end up with usually flatter roofs, less interesting roofs.
So the idea is to try and, wherever plausible, setting aside the commercial high ceiling, flat roof, is to encourage the roof plane to be angled and visible rather than flat.
Really?
Wouldn't say angled and visible necessarily. Like in the urban center, I think it's
Urban
just,
center.
I think it's more of a design.
Well, with parapets and stuff in the urban centre, you're okay, but yeah.
A lot of
Seems
snow
like-
on a flat roof.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like any time you would have somebody who's actually, I don't know, in the situation, considering all this, trying to maximize their square footage, it's not going to be a residential person.
No, it's, yeah.
And it's going to be in a place where you would probably not want to encourage interesting roofs. Just, I don't know.
Well, multifamily residential buildings
Yeah.
could fall into that. Where you could,
Now, I have a question because someone could, with the 2-story minimum now, it says that the maximum a story can be is 16 feet. So if someone wanted to, say, build a structure downtown and they wanted to build a large open restaurant with very high grand ceilings, 30 feet in the air or 32 feet in the air, a huge open concept restaurant, I'm trying to
Like
think.
the marina.
I'm trying to think of how because technically that would be a mezzanine. The second floor, because it doesn't take a, I don't
But
think.
there are portions that have very high ceilings.
Yeah, but, I'm
We
just
can
trying
go
to
up
think.
to 24 for non-residential, so.
I'm just trying to
12 to 24.
think. I guess I'm being like overly critical. I just want to think of like worst case scenario, what would happen if.
I'm just surprised that the floor height is 7 because I'm used to like 10. Taller.
You said the
people in
code
this room.
7?
The code is 7.
At a minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's written by people who are probably 4 feet tall, so I don't know.
Century.
Seems like a lot for them.
So you go in all those colonial Williamsburg houses and the ceilings are low.
I can't get in most stuff built, between
I'm sure they're much
90.
taller in Australia.
They're usually 12 feet.
Well, I'm also wondering too, like a good example was
Spend too much time
where
about that.
Thai bamboo was. That was required to be 2 stories, but it was, or Thai garden was. It's Thai bamboo now?
Yeah.
Okay. Required to be 2 stories, but wasn't entirely feasible with the size of the area they were working with, and so they built what in essence from the outside looks like a 2-story structure, but on the inside is really 1 story because it's open.
Offices up there, don't they?
Don't they have offices in the back?
I thought they had offices in
Above
the
the
back.
kitchen?
In May.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
I thought when you look from the back, it looks like.
So that's one of the
Your
ongoing,
opinion.
well, that's one of the
That's what they
ongoing
keep all the
disputes on
debates,
this
yeah.
height
Documented
question.
workers.
Whether what you want to create is the visual from the street of the 2 stories, or whether what you want to create is the functional space of 2 stories and the options of
Yeah.
how those 2 stories can be used over time. So you can
That's actually
go,
interesting.
yeah, you can go with just that it has to appear as a 2-story building from the street. Generally, if what you're trying to drive away from are these single-use, lower-quality buildings, then you actually want a functional second story. You don't want just the appearance from the street. And you're also creating a building that has more possibilities for the future. The one thing that this does do is that that second story space doesn't need to go the full depth of the building. So it only needs to go 30 feet deep. So it is possible, so say, like a good example of this might be an industrial type building where you could have sort of 2 level of office space in the front of it and then a warehouse space out in the back that might be taller,
Brown Roberts does that.
that's a fairly common building type.
So it's not based on percentage, it's based on 30 feet by
30.
whatever facade.
Yep, 30 feet back.
And the mezzanine.
So that gives you functional space. That could be, living space. It could be
Could
office space.
Could that 30 feet create problems? Because I don't even think that building is barely 30 feet wide itself.
The Thai bamboo joint?
Thai bamboo place.
It seems like an urban center, you definitely want to encourage as much density as possible.
I know, you do, but then you also run into the interesting problem of if you have like a micro property that you can't, that's not entirely feasible for you to build upwards with.
You can always go up.
How can, well, financially or whatever, it's not entirely feasible. Is there a way that someone could skirt it, I guess? I don't know.
Well,
Do you want them
It's a
to?
thought.
I guess.
Yeah.
yeah, the question is whether you want them to or not.
Yeah. Well, it's also balancing like if things are going to get, if something's going to get built at all there, because that could have easily just stayed a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot. Yeah.
So,
Well,
just
people can still get up the warehouse. I mean, right?
you wouldn't waive that condition just because people were finding it difficult to finance or something like that. You would waive it because there was some external set of technical features that, on
There would have
balance,
to be a physical.
the physical constraint.
Right.
Which I guess could theoretically exist for why you couldn't build.
What if it was-
The weirdest one I can come up with is that a magnificent tree of some note that's already been recorded, and the list of trees or something is in the backyard or the front yard, and that it would be too complicated to build, and you don't want to disturb the tree. But that's kind of a freaky. I can't think of too many
But
others.
that's an
What is-
impediment caused by the properties of the land.
Yes,
So you could get a variance.
yes, or a waiver. We would call it a waiver.
Is there another way to simplify it? Like, could we just go with a height with kind of a waiver for interesting roof features? I don't. I mean, it seems like the story thing is somewhat confusing. I'm not very good with this kind of architectural. I'm having a hard time visioning.
On this,
Are we encouraging interesting enough design by these restrictions on stories?
What happened to FAR? Are we not doing that at all?
They're in the
Weird.
chart.
Yes.
FAR is in there.
Yeah.
I guess what I was thinking, somewhat I wasn't willing to throw in the towel like Sue just did, but maybe some maybe some drawings or
We will
something.
be drawings.
Okay,
eventually.
so-
I try to hold off on doing the drawings until the numbers are a little more solid.
Right. So I think for the sake of being able to explain it to applicants, it would be good to sort of show how and when the story measure applies versus the feet measure applies, or which one takes precedence over the other and under what circumstances. So it's sort of like, the way I read it is the sense that the story measurement is a break against dull application of feet. And so that would encourage more interesting roof lines and or massing and proportioning of the building, because you're dealing with stories. But there's a way in which it's not clear to me totally when the stories measurement would cut in and the feet.
Districts.
Yeah. But even looking at this, it's sort of like,
Do you have drawings of stories in other documents, so I can look on your website and
I can
link to
pull some
documents?
stuff for you.
Yeah.
For stories.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time.
I think absent having to explain it to somebody else, I'm okay, or absent having to review an application. But I think I could imagine getting pretty badly embroiled, sort of saying to an applicant, "Ooh, it's all about the stories," and they're going, "No, it's about the feet," and that kind of. Yep.
I have a couple comments on this table, but I think you want to go back to what we're
Well-
talking about first.
I guess it depends on the nature of the questions or comments. I guess if they're specific to a district, it'd be better to incorporate that into the discussion
Because
of
the
the
tables
district.
all
but-
refer to the districts, right?
Yes, but if it's more of a broad conceptual question about the measurements themselves, then maybe we should deal with them now.
If we're trying to encourage more interesting buildings, is there one specific district that we're thinking about? I mean, is it just like commercial buildings, downtown buildings? I mean, what?
So the story measurements are primarily in the developed zoning districts, so
Yeah.
the downtown, urban centers, that's where there's both a minimum and a maximum. The larger commercial areas, those have the 24 feet minimum and then
Right.
a maximum 4-story or something else to go with them. In the rural areas, we just went with the feet.
So here's a hypothetical question for you. In the service center, you have a minimum height of 24 feet and a maximum height of 4 stories. You have defined a story as between 8 and 16 feet. So someone so the minimum height then would, I guess, be 1.5 stories.
Well,
so
that's the
I'm getting
16.
tripped up on
Yeah, the 8
1.5.
and 16 is for residential. It's
Oh, okay.
12 and 24 for commercial and mixed use buildings.
Oh, okay.
So you could do that, and you have to think about a commercial building that might have some sort of facade treatment on it. It's not necessarily that the ceiling height is 24 feet in that building. It's that the front facade measurement, the top of that building is not, it's 24 feet or more.
Mm. So they could have, like, someone could conceivably do like old Western style, with like a huge flat front. That's just like a wall.
We do have some other design standards that come into play.
Well,
That
oddly,
concept-
I mean, the parapet design that is actually dominant along Main Street between High and Elliott. Somebody was working on the riverside of one of those opposite the works today, and the workers were all patching the roof or something, or stripping the roof off, actually, I guess. And you could just, it's clearly the parapet is 4 or 5 feet higher than the roof. It must be the same as Bob's building, and that seems to be pretty common for the era. And there's some aesthetic considerations there, and then there's probably some practical considerations. It's sort of like a little skirt, but on the top of the building that hides all the plumbing and junk that they got on top of the roofs and that kind of stuff, and ventilation shafts and things. And then
It's more of a turtleneck.
it's kind of a turtleneck, yeah, exactly. That's good. I like that. Yeah, that's why I use one. And then the other, I'm thinking, the Staples Plaza. I'm pretty sure if you get up behind that, particularly the part where Pan Asian and stuff is, if you get in
that lovely little.
you get in the corner there, and
on the
there's nothing behind that but daylight. So there was a big thing in the 80s with postmodern architecture where they were totally into just using basic geometric shapes to trigger your thoughts of classic forms, and they were very open that it was like building a set for a movie or for a play. There was no intention of doing anything behind it, and so that's probably the only example I can think of in Brattleboro that does that. Maybe the Ann Wilder Richards building, which was a bank building out in West Beach, does that a little bit too. But you go places like New York City, any kind of city, and it's just full of that stuff. And the other weird ones that fall into that category, unbelievably, are Walgreens and CVS. Both got into that in a really big way. So most Walgreens and CVS is the freestanding one, like the Walgreens at Canal. There's absolutely nothing behind most of that corner wall. If you get in behind it, it's just wall. So I couldn't catch what your comment was.
Oh.
No.
Sorry.
Sorry.
We could do
We
it.
can,
when
we
get to
can
new
do
business.
it later. Yeah, it's what I think. There's something here. Yep. All right. So we okay? We can move on.
Where are we anyway?
Well,
Getting stuck on architectural
stuck
design.
on dimensional standards.
Right.
So, moving on from that. So what we then fall into is the tables of usage and such.
Yeah.
And then you come to 220, the developed zoning district. So the first one is the urban center district.
Which page are we on?
It's 214.
Yeah.
So you go past the tables.
And then we're going to go back.
Can there be some way to make these tables a little more distinct from each other? When I was looking at them, they kind of all just ran together, so I wasn't really
Yes,
being cognizant that one was dimensional standards and the others were.
Yeah, the headings could
the
be.
headings are really small.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the use standards table goes on at great length for a number of pages, and then the dimensional standards table is just the one page.
I had a couple questions, or well, one specifically about the use standard, but we're going to cover this in the individual.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you have a broad-based question that isn't specific
No, it's a
to
specific one. It's
yeah,
I'll
so
save
we'll
it.
come around to it
Okay.
as we look at the districts. So the zoning district, the urban center area, is not significantly different geographically than what it is currently. Pulling back just a little bit from where it is now, so that it basically encompasses the block commercial building area, and along the edges where there was starting to be a little more detached buildings, we're scooting them off into the mixed-use district. It's mostly, in most cases, it's just like one lot, deep type thing, splitting around the edges. If you do want to see the map, this has got the current zoning districts in black, so you can see that, a little bit of this southern edge here is pulled back, a little
Meaning
bit to the
no
west.
longer considered like historic?
It wouldn't be in the urban center. This is not the
Urban
historic.
center. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
So we have a different layer, which is the historic
Right.
district, and that's not shown here.
Yeah.
So could you just explain your reasoning for pulling some of those back? Because some of those properties are not multi-use per se, but fairly dense properties.
Yes. The standards that go with the urban center district are really meant to maintain block building patterns, so essentially built to the edge of the sidewalk, contiguous street wall with only like alleys and lanes going in between the buildings, style of building. So where that doesn't exist within what's currently in the urban center, those are the places we're pulling back. So there's along the edges there was more detached buildings.
But what if some of those areas have a real potential to fulfill that?
Well, that's a good question for this group to talk about. I mean, do you want
Yeah.
to see that pattern extend out from where it currently exists
So it's that age-old challenge with lots of stuff to do with zoning, which is do you go with the current setting and design district boundaries and rules that mean that most of the properties inside that district are going to conform, or do you have a vision of the future that suggests that area is going to dramatically change, and then in an effort to get to this new version, you're willing to actually suggest that a certain number, if not a large number, of properties would be non-conforming now because you've set some other goal for yourself to sort of approach. And so the policy question for the Planning Commission here is to either A, acknowledge that there's a very distinct building form that from an architectural and for streetscape standpoint, the urban center has a particular character, the so-called block form, and that the boundaries for the urban center should stick to that edge fairly faithfully? Or do you make the urban center district bigger and set design standards and other rules in the zoning ordinance to encourage those edge parts of the district to become more like the block area? So that would be, and so trying to get that right is an interesting and important thing, but it's basically a policy decision that this body has to make and the select board has to support.
One of the things that the town plan did was identify areas that were marginal, not necessarily the downtown, but other areas along Canal Street that should be chopped up to allow for a good size village commercial or neighborhood commercial. I don't know which one you want to call it. And then Canal Street be residential, and then urban center again, to kind of create a pressure within the urban center for the commercial uses.
What is Canal Street? Is this mixed use?
This is
This is Canal here.
Yep. And then this is Canal's mixed use. Is that?
Yeah, that's mixed use. Yeah.
Yep.
The colors are a little, they don't read very
Looks
well.
like brown.
You have too many districts.
This is that nice green color. What do you call that color?
This one?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's this.
That's the yellow.
Right. And then
So what's
Far end.
And this is
When-
the mixed use. When you
Yeah.
put it over the air photo and you
Yeah.
make
Yeah,
it
it
transparent.
darkens.
when
right.
you drop it out, when you drop orange over the air photo, you
Right.
get this kind of tanny. I don't know what you call this color.
Village
And then that's
center?
the neighborhood center.
so that's
Yeah, but it's already too large.
Right.
Yep.
It would straight.
And then the magenta.
And what's
of the
village?
service center. the village is pink and
West Brattleboro.
it's out there. You can't see it on this
It's the
part of the
existing.
map.
Right.
One of the things we had talked about in the town plan was actually coming along Canal Street to Elm and putting some of these properties in. That was actually, I think it was the CO. We were thinking of putting an urban center.
Right.
We had talked about this area up in here. Well, there was a lot of talk. I don't
So
think
we were
ever-
thinking of a more broadly defined urban center, and this shows a more narrowly defined urban center.
Well,
It's more consistent
it's
with
more
what we
consistent
have.
with what currently exists. My,
And it's based on the architect, like the building form.
the building form.
yeah. I guess my feeling is that there's some areas on here that I see where it actually makes sense that I guess I agree with in such a way, but then there's some areas where I could see future potential for the same type of building development happening, especially in a few areas that are like the few flat areas left in the downtown area.
Very few flat areas left.
Particularly like
Yeah.
this area here. I would say along this area, particularly that corner of Portland Glass. I actually think we'd want it less so up here because there's a park there. But particularly in these areas down here.
So you like it kind of to match more of the existing. This black line is from the existing.
Kind of, yeah. I don't really see it making very much sense up here because that's a pretty defined residential neighborhood. But like down here, this kind of corner of Elm and Elliott, where the apartment buildings are, and that's a good area to throw in a continuing streetscape.
So what's the major difference between urban center and,
Mixed use?
other parking requirement?
Number of stories.
Number of stories.
There's
There's a parking requirement for mixed use.
The frontage, the zero setback
Yep.
component is quite different. In the urban center, you could basically have 100% lot coverage.
Okay.
So there's quite a bit. It's dimensionally, it's meant to build out.
Yeah, it's kind of limiting retail to a certain square footage in a building because they are really, it's primarily residential neighborhoods. There are some areas of commercial services, but so this allows it, but kind of limits the size of it.
Yeah, so it's 80% maximum coverage from mixed use.
80%.
Yeah.
I'd interrupt for a minute to kind of poll the group to see how we felt about the time. It's 20 after 8 now. Shall we go to 8:30? Shall we go to 9? What are everybody's thoughts?
What do you want to try and just finish this? What comes after this issue? Is this I'm trying to sort of figure out whether there's another meaty issue after this, or whether this is going to sort of do its
Before we
thing.
start on the actual districts.
We started talking about urban center.
Yeah. So are we? How close to? What else have we got to think about with the urban centre? What's that?
All of it.
All of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we'd be safer picking a time.
Okay.
I'd like to, I'm glad going until 9 if we can just take a little break.
I would actually, I'd hate to cut it short, but I think now would actually be if we were going to stop. No, because
Yeah.
well, because
I want to go.
we're just starting to get into the zoning districts.
Yeah.
I'd hate to get
Yeah.
halfway through urban center and
Yeah.
then have it be 9 and we have
Right.
I'd rather get to the end of a section than just stop
I
at
agree.
the same time.
I'm tired.
I don't know how long it's going to take us to get through the urban center, if we could get through it, or if people want to stop now.
We all agree with Brandy. It's pretty quick.
Knowing us.
Just saying, if you want.
I have a feeling the first district will take the longest
Yes.
to get through because we got to sort of work
The
through
pattern.
the concepts and
Yeah.
the approach.
Picking it apart, that's right.
Yep.
Right.
And the other option is we could take a little break now and then see if we can do urban center and then call it a day.
I'm Friday.
Friday.
I like to go home.
Yeah.
All right. I'm hearing go
I
home.
work from 6:30.
Okay, so
So next time we start
can we
at 2:21.
compromise to the extent that everyone's clear about the distinction that we're drawing here? So maybe what we can do is if we're gonna end it here, which is fine, then when we come back, this is where we're gonna pick up. And so I just want to check in with people and get that they're clear about what's in question here.
The boundary of urban center.
The boundary of urban centre, but why did what method did Brandy use to redraw the urban centre district, and what it would mean in some ways to sort of go back to the other one or expand it.
And I don't know how many of you have played with Google Earth on your computers, but if you have that and you play with it, I can actually send you a file where you could open up the districts.
Could you?
Google
Because I
Earth.
feel like it's hard to think about this
And then
without
you can actually
looking
sort of
at it.
see where these lines are going.
That would be
Yeah.
very
Yep.
That'd be
helpful.
good.
Yeah, that would be
We
helpful.
made
I have a KVM.
we made some
I haven't
tweaks.
figured out how to open it up.
If you don't click it, it doesn't open. You go to Google Earth, you open Google
Open
Earth,
it and
then
then
open
click
it.
on
open your
it.
file.
Can you just make a PDF?
You can make a PDF, but I can certainly do
We
that
have.
as
I can
well.
send you the PDF.
Yeah, we can do that.
And I can send you the K.
Either
KVM.
both? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Came out.
The good thing about the Google Earth file is that you can zoom in much better
Right.
than you
Right.
can in the
Right.
PDF.
And so for me, to just David's point, I can imagine the existing CO along here on this side, or the northern side of Canal Street, being included in the urban centre, because I actually think that, apart from the little pocket park and things, most of those old Victorian,
Yeah.
there's some funky stuff in there like Sporty's Lounge, which is not going anywhere.
Yeah, that was one of those
Right.
areas that we were talking about.
Right.
For a long
It's
time,
so
yeah.
constrained. Like there's such small parcels.
Well,
Yeah.
then I was also thinking of like,
To make it residential.
that corner with Portland glass has
Residential up over.
has very potential for like a corner store with apartments above,
Oddly enough,
That could
it
happen
does
in
have
the mixed use.
the building immediately next to it, that funky Napa / barbershop weird thing, has apartments
Oh, no.
behind and above,
Yeah.
which is a little, it's not ideal as a setting, but
Yeah.
So, but just so, anyway, just encouraging people to really, go for a walk and think about it and see what it is that that this approach is trying to implement and weigh that against other things that we might want to implement.
And I would
Is
point
that
out
just in that, along that Canal Street?
You should take a miniaturized version of this map, just print it out or something, or figure it out, and then
It's not as, I'd come in the
and
office
walk
and get it.
walk the boundaries or something. That would be one way of doing it.
Now, before we adjourn, or even call for adjourn, when is our next meeting? Because
Oh,
Labor Day is,
It's Wednesday, September 3rd, 6 o'clock here. September. That's
and so we have our homework for tonight. Will we be getting additional things to review?
Yes.
Yes.
We'll get the rural districts.
I'm just curious how
Well, the next
how
section.
we are progressing in the scheme of
Right.
everything. Have we already started to fall off the wagon?
We're
Yeah.
about a
Yes.
meeting behind at this point.
Okay, so maybe after the September meeting, should we consider jamming in another meeting somewhere?
Yeah, maybe.
I'm fine with that, but I'll leave it up to Brandy and.
Yeah, I think, we're going to want to get through these zoning
Do
districts would be my
work
thought, so that we can have some public meetings
Yeah.
before we get to, I don't like to do
You
them
know well.
in mid-November.
Yeah.
There's a bad period that starts after Thanksgiving and extends till after New Year's, where having public meetings
Oh, yeah.
is not a
yeah,
good
holidays.
idea. So it'd be great to be able to do some of this zoning district, public meeting on that in, late October, early November at the latest.
I'd be willing to come for, we only just recently went to one meeting a month, so I'd be willing to, if it really helps to go through this more in depth, because it takes a while.
Yeah.
And we ask all kinds of crazy questions that are pertinent and important, but, it takes time to plow through all that.
I would say just, as long as it doesn't conflict with our,
Oh, the DRB.
the DRB meetings, I think we're fairly good, I would say.
So at the next meeting, we'll have suggestions of the second meeting.
Yeah.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right.